Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Remembering John Pierrakos. I have with me today Lisa Loustaunau, who's been a practitioner for over 25 years, has been an international teacher for many, many years, and in fact was the head of curriculum, head of education at the New York Institute for many years as well. She tells me she's retired, but come on, Lisa, you cannot sit still. I know you're still seeing people doing good work, aren't you? Yeah. This is one of those retirements that's gonna happen. We had a rock star here in Australia, and he was always doing his farewell tour, but he could never finish doing it. I'm remembering you at this point.
Right, right. Yeah. Well, I love the work. It's like it's part of me. I can't even imagine not being involved in the community, not being involved in people's processes. I feel like it's the greatest blessing that I've received in my life, among the many blessings I've had in my life, just to have found my way into this work, to have had the honor of, having the facilitators, the teachers I had that allowed me to, walk my journey with CORE. And I continue to just kind of be with whatever evolution comes next. So, I'm here and open for it all.
So that's that classic saying, isn't it, about never working a day in your life when it's something like this. So
It's absolutely true. I don't feel like I've worked a day in well, that's before CORE. I think that was different, but definitely it doesn't feel like work. It just, you know, um, it's the greatest honor to be able to work with people who are committed to their journey, and so it just feels like when the energy moves,
yes.
you connect to the aliveness, and Vernil, you know what it's like. So I'm not telling you anything you don't know.
I'm often telling people this is my hobby, and they look at me aghast and shocked and go, "What? Oh my God, it's your hobby!" It's like, well, how else can I put it? Because that's how it feels to me.
Right. Yes.
But hey, thanks for making the time. This is so cool, and I love what you're talking about because we're here to talk about John and remember him. So, I mean, how did you come into the work? How did you meet John?
Okay. Well, interestingly enough, I had already been in a process group, in a core process group for 5 years before I decided to enter the training.
Hmm.
And when I entered the training, I didn't even know it was called core energetics. I mean, the name core energetics, for some reason, was never mentioned in my process group. We just got together, what we did with the leader of that group, who to whom I own to whom I owe so much in my life. And one day, the people in my process group and myself, we all said, "How do you do this stuff? How do you do that? How is it that, like, when you put your hand on somebody's heart, like they go, woo, and out come all the feelings? How do you do that? We want to do that." And so I actually began the training in a satellite program. And so my experience was with a very small group of practitioners. But in order to enter and start the training, we all had to interview with John, who was in New York City. He was at the 23rd Street location at the time where he had his office, and that's where the training was. But I was training in Westchester County. So I went into the city to meet him. And what I most remember about him is that he had read my biography and he was moved by it. And somehow I never anticipated, because I was a very lengthy writer. I mean, you know, he gave me an assignment, I would give you a doctoral thesis. So that's just the way I was. And so my biography was an oeuvre. It was a work. And he had read it all, and I was so moved by that. And when I went in and sat down, he never, he opened his eyes. He had greeted me at the door. He sat down and then he closed his eyes. And what he focused on was the fact that I had lost my parents when I was 19, turning 20 in a car accident. And so he with his eyes closed, said to me, "You've suffered such a terrible tragedy. What meaning do you give to that?" And, we started this conversation, and all the while he had his eyes closed. So it wasn't like I was being interviewed. I felt like I was being received and heard. And I felt moved by the connection that I had with him instantly. Like, I liked him. He wasn't the intimidating person I had so heard about, at least not with me. Although I saw him be intimidating with other people, for sure, along the way. But it was a very soft entry with John and I. And I feel like in some ways that continued. He was never someone that confronted me in a tough way, in the way I saw him sometimes confront people. And for that, I don't know. I just felt like he knew how to, that like a softer touch was what I needed coming into the work. So,
Mm,
yeah.
mm. So how did that unfold then over your training years? Did you get, was John participating in the teaching as well with you guys, or had he been,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes, he was one of the teachers. We had quite a few teachers. And the first 2 years, we had teachers that came to Westchester from the New York Institute. And so
one?
I didn't actually experience my first class with John until I was in my third year, you
Okay.
know. And so, I'll be frank with you, his classes were mixed bags. There were moments where he was so heart centered and so profound and so clear. And there were others where it seemed like whatever the topic of the day, that was kind of that he was interested in would somehow kind of filter in, and suddenly we would veer off into discussions about black holes and you know and physics and all that sort. But you know what, there was a way in which it was John, and we just kind of sat there and kind of said, it felt like a gift to have him in the class. And
Yeah.
as I said, there were times when it was more on point than others, but you know, he he had already been teaching and working for so many years, and he wasn't young anymore. And so I was just appreciative that I was getting to be taught by the founder of this work.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah,
So
that's wonderful. And then, so how did that progress for you from, you know, participating in the training to then become part of the faculty and more engaged and involved in a different part of the, I guess, the movement from that point of view?
yes, well, it's interesting because John, when I was in my fifth year, in my postgraduate year, things were a little bit different than they are structured now. Like now, you have to do 5 years before you can become an assistant. When I was in my fifth year, you were able to assist as well. And so I was still in my postgraduate year and had already starting assisting John in some of his classes. And John picked his assistant. So, I felt lucky in that. I felt like I had been chosen in a certain way. And I know later when I presented my fifth year project, he was very supportive. He loved my project. And so he often invited me to assist him, not only in his teachings at the Institute, but also that occurred in other places. I was in Brazil with him at one point. I was officially assisting Karen at the time. She was the person that had invited me to teach in the training in Sao Paulo, um, which had 70 people. And she and John were very involved in a lot of meetings. There was a lot of stuff happening within within the training, within the organization at the time. And so they both like supported me in teaching the class. Like I got thrown into teaching like big time. Like I didn't
Fantastic.
arrive prepared to teach, but it was like we have to be in these meetings, have this group, and it had 70 people in it. And I got to tell you, Reniel, it was like I was so freaked out. I did not get a moment's sleep the night before. I mean, my stomach was a mess. I don't know how I pulled it off. It was like an out of body teaching experience for me. The
Amazing.
complete opposite of grounded, that's for sure. But it was good enough. And, and I also, got to really, watch him and observe him as he worked with people. I could see, how different he could be. I certainly could see how he liked the attractive women. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else has told you this in the interview with him,
Oh
but
yeah.
when he would say, "Who wants to work?" and 25 people would raise their hand and he would pick the one he was attracted to. So, yeah, no, he was quite the debonair guy, with his ascots and his suits and all that. And you
Yeah.
remember that, I'm sure, as well
Yeah.
about him. But he had some sides to him that I think I felt lucky to have seen. I remember in one of those trips to Brazil, it was actually the day we were preparing to leave for the airport to go back. And I was on the property. It was a wonderful property. And I was just taking a walk. And there was a statue of Mary, the Blessed Virgin. I mean, he was Greek, and so he, um, was raised in a Christian tradition. And I saw him kneeling in front of the statue with his hands like this praying. And it just broke me open. Like I felt like he had such, like he'd never spoken about devotion to, call it the traditional, you know, um, uh, to the traditional religion of his youth. He had never spoken about that because he really spoke about alchemy and transformation and the human spirit and energy and consciousness. But I saw this part of him that was still, that had this very strong devotional piece, you know. And then I had these other experiences with him that were just so wild. Is it okay if I just kind of blabber on this way a little bit?
This is perfect. I mean, I wish we were sitting here together with a coffee or something else that you prefer and doing exactly the same thing.
Okay, perfect. But I'm just going down memory lane here, and we had gone. We were in an airport terminal in Brazil, and he loved the espresso covered coffee beans. And so he would buy this big bag of espresso coffee, espresso chocolate covered espresso beans. And we were sitting there and we were conversing and we were talking about many things. He'd ask about my children and we got onto the plane. We weren't seated together. He had his own. He had arranged for his own seat. And all of a sudden, I see John walking down the aisle of the seat of the plane, offering every single passenger on the seat in the plane, "Would you like an a chocolate covered espresso bean? Would you like one? Would you like one?" He went through the whole plane, offering people the coffee beans. I thought to myself, he's like the mayor of the plane. You know, he he was all in his extravagant. He was happened to be in his gold leisure suit, which was the most extravagant of them all in my mind.
Yeah.
You know, walking up and down the aisles, chuckling and laughing and talking to people and giving these things out. And I thought to myself, he's such a ham. I just thought it was like really funny, you know.
Oh, how cool. And especially given at some angles he was so short, you probably couldn't see him through the seat. Did you hear this little voice in the background?
Oh yeah, well I always made sure I had an aisle seat. So I saw him doing the whole procession, like with all the pomp and just like hello and this and so anyway, so yeah, he had quite a personality. Um it was interesting to see that kind of social side of him, you
Yeah,
know.
wonderful. Yeah,
And and he had some naughty things too that he did. He was naughty sometimes. I remember when we moved or actually, no, that's not true. We were having a faculty retreat. We were having a faculty retreat at a center called Wisdom House, which is actually where we currently are still doing the training, even though like this was years way before we moved there.
Right, right.
And at that time, there were more of the Catholic nuns that were still in habits there.
Okay.
And so we would be, the faculty was in the lunchroom, and there was like a table of nuns sitting there. And he snuck in a bottle of ouzo at lunchtime in a brown paper bag. So it's lunchtime. We're having lunch. We're like midday through like the processes. And he's going around. He's like, "Do you want a ouzo? Do you want a ouzo?" You know? And so he's going around to the different tables and he drops it.
Uh-oh.
And and it breaks. And the ouzo shatters all over the floor. And he was like mortified. The face that I saw on it was just so precious. It was like he was caught, you know? And like the nuns were all looking at him. And of course, it reeked of alcohol because ouzo is, 195% alcohol, you know? So, there were just these interesting sides to him.
That's fantastic. Because of course, with traveling with him and spending all of this other time with him, you got to experience these different, I guess, sides of John, and to find yourself in a different place. And I mean, how was your personal interaction with him as you saw him through these different lenses?
Yeah, there was a sweetness in our interaction. As I mentioned,
Yeah.
since the first interaction, there was a sweetness with him, and he would try to be a little kind of tough with me. Sometimes he'd like, I'd be walking by and he'd suddenly like stick a hand out and like kind of like smack me in the belly and say, "You don't receive," you know? And I'm like, "Well, I'm certainly not going to receive it if you deliver it that way, John." And he was like, "Okay, okay, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." you know? So
Yeah.
he would, you know, like he would have this mode of being that he was with certain people
Yeah.
that was kind of stricter. And I think it came from like out of the very transference that he was receiving for the people from certain individuals that kind of, were a little afraid of him, were a little intimidated by him. Somehow that wasn't what I experienced with him. I didn't feel intimidated by him. I respected him. I honored the work he was, but there was humor in our relationship, you
Yeah.
know? I remember one night we were having, because, during faculty intensives, he would always say, after the work, we party. And of course, out came the bottle of ouzo, you know, on came the music, he would want to dance. And he took me out to dance at one moment. And so it was like salsa, it was Latin salsa dancing. And I'm half Latina, I'm half Colombian. I lived in South America for 10 years. My first husband was Colombian. I mean, I grew up dancing salsa. And so he starts to dance. And so I start like leading him. And he's like, "I'm the man, I lead." And I said to him, I said, "John, you don't know how to dance this dance." And then he said, "Okay, you lead." You know, so he'd come on tough, but then in a second, he was like a puppy dog. Like he'd have this bark, and then
Mm.
he'd back down.
Uh,
You know?
it's so beautiful as you've been speaking about him through our whole conversation today. I've really been feeling this soft, loving, juicy energy that you guys had. It's really inspiring, Lisa, because I mean, as you know, I've got girls, and so to feel that you had that with them, and I see this with my girls and the fun that we have. Um, it's really encouraging. It's really encouraging that you were able to have that with him, and
Yeah.
and he shared him so much of himself with you.
Yes. And because he could be tough on people.
Yeah.
You know, I saw him be tough with some people in a way that people got hurt. But that's, I mean, this is a man who worked with thousands and thousands of people. It's very hard to imagine that you can be perfectly attuned every which way, every time.
Yeah. No,
It's
that's
impossible. I mean, he was human.
yeah, for sure, for sure.
He was.
So in all of this, um, if you could sort of let yourself go to one or two things, a few things that really stood out and have stuck with you in terms of John the teacher, John the scientist, John the man, what would they be?
Yeah. Um, After he died, a group of us got together to clean out what was called his meditation room. And the meditation room was the place where he had the orgone box that he had, where Eva's channeling chair was there, all his books, all his papers, all his documents. And it was, I mean, it wasn't the office where he saw clients, but there were 4 or 5 of us on this team that had a chance to really go through his books, his writings, to see his crystals, to see his scientific objects, to see, letters that he wrote over the years. And so you could see all these, these different moments. Like there were all these documents about the the Curlian photography experiments, from back in the day, that, in the 1970s, and the experiments he was doing with plants, and how plants would respond to the human energy field, how he could actually see his plants droop, or kind of be, kind of a little bit more perky after a certain client. He could like read and get information from the plants. And so he was such a mystic, he was such a scientist, and he was such a skilled body worker. He would often work, and sometimes he would work in a more ergonomic way with not a lot of work, but very directly into the body. And there were also times where he knew when a person wasn't ready for body work. You know, that was such a lesson. I don't remember what year I was in. I might have been in my third or fourth year of the training. And he used to do case presentations in the evenings. And a person came in that had, severe scoliosis of the spine. And he sat with this man and he held his hand, and he was, again, very, very gentle in a way that sometimes he was and sometimes he wasn't. And he just sat and talked to this man for an entire hour. And all of us, after, when we started to debrief the case, you could really hear, like, all the kind of the feelings in the room. But John, there was no body work. This is energy. Where was the energy work? And he said, this person was not ready for the body work yet. You have to know the difference. You have to understand that, And so, moments like that were priceless, because no one else had ever said something like that. It wasn't like, you always do body work, you always do energy work. No one had actually ever said that's not always the case. You know, so there were very important lessons that I garnered through my years and my experience in watching him and assisting him. You know, that I feel have made up part of the way, I work, even though I don't work like John, I work like Lisa. Um, but I feel so grateful to have been blessed by his presence in my life, and it makes me kind of cry. You know,
It's beautiful.
you know,
And to go
you
through
know.
his meditation room and his private history, memoir, I guess stages of his own life and work. Wow. Feeling so much of that energy as you guys must have been going through discovering another side of John.
Yes, yeah, his crystals. They were all quite dusty. I brought them home to my home in Connecticut. I washed them all. I put them in the sun, and then I drove them all back, and we put them up on shelves that we had built. So just to honor that. But he had so many dimensions. He was really multi-dimensional, literally.
Yeah, yeah. And that the orgone box, that was one of Reich's original ones from what I remember.
Yeah, it was kind of falling apart. You know,
Not surprising. It's probably
it
seen
was
some tough
kind of like
times.
it was like literally the door was kind of falling off and everything, but it was still kind of iconic, So it was still a special thing.
Well, yeah, so much history in that thing. I can only imagine. That
Yeah.
sounds terrific. Well, Lisa, look, thanks so much for your time today and for being you. I really appreciate you taking us down memory lane. If you could leave us with anything else about anything else, do you feel inclined? Is there something else you'd like to say to us?
Well, I think what I'd like to share is a message to, the practitioners in training that all have new models of the work. There are models of the work because every core energetics practitioner works with the material, but through the lens of their own, unique expression. And so, when you're first starting out, you kind of try to imitate the different people that have modeled the work for you. But I guess ultimately, I guess my message is like to allow yourself to discover, your own personal flavor. Take all that modeling, take it to heart, let it filter through, let it titrate, and then let it be you, you know, and and in this way you will be offering your gift to the world. You know, each person has their gift to bring, and I feel so blessed again to be working with practitioners who are nurturing their gifts. And yeah, that would be it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate your time. And, I think I may come back to you and we can share some more stories moving forward at some stage when you have a moment. But I understand you're about to take a few days off and spend some time with your family. So that's the most important thing on the calendar at the moment, I would suspect.
It is.
Oh, wonderful. So thanks again, Lisa. And we will chat again soon.
Thank you, Renee.